The ATM line was long that morning, stretching around the corner of the tiny neighborhood bank like a slow-moving parade of tired souls. It was cold, and people huddled in coats, shuffling forward inch by inch. Clara stood quietly, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets, her breath fogging up in the winter air. She wasn't in a rush, not really. After all, she only had $23 left in her account, and she was praying that the last welfare payment had come in today. She wasn't even sure she had enough to buy groceries and diapers for her baby daughter. Still, she stood patiently, a quiet resolve in her eyes. Behind her, a man paced. He looked out of place. His shoulders were hunched, not just from the cold, but from something heavier, like the weight of an invisible world pressing down on him. His shoes were expensive but worn, his hands fidgeting as though trying to control an invisible storm. He kept checking his phone though the screen remained dark. Clara noticed him from the corner of her eye. He looked desperate, but not in the usual way people in this neighborhood did. There was something deeper. Something hollow in his gaze. Then it happened. The man stepped out of line and approached her, hesitating only a second before speaking. I'm sorry, he said, voice hoarse. I know this is odd, but would you mind if I go ahead of you? I just need to check something quickly. It's urgent. Clara blinked. People rarely made requests like this here. Usually, cutting the line meant a fight, a scream, maybe even fists. But she looked at him, really looked, and saw something familiar in that raw, broken look. Maybe she saw herself in his eyes, a person hanging by a thread. She smiled softly and stepped aside. Go ahead, she said gently. The man looked stunned, like he hadn't expected kindness today. He muttered a quiet thank you and stepped ahead, his fingers trembling as he inserted his card into the machine. Clara watched as he stood frozen for a moment, eyes locked on the screen. Then, without withdrawing anything, he removed the card and stepped aside, standing there blankly. Clara went about her turn, but her mind lingered on the man. He hadn't withdrawn any money. Had he not had any? He looked like someone who once had everything, and now, nothing. She didn't know his name. She didn't ask. But she couldn't stop thinking about him as she walked back to her apartment with a small bag of bread, milk, and discount cereal. It wasn't enough, not really. But it would do. His name was Daniel Wade. 3 days earlier, Daniel had woken up in a luxury penthouse in the city, worth more than most people made in 10 lifetimes. He had a closet full of Italian suits, a company with over 400 employees, and more power than he ever asked for. He was the CEO of Wade Tech Industries, a massive firm dealing in sustainable technology. But none of it mattered anymore. Because in 72 hours, he had lost it all. His co-founder, his childhood friend, had betrayed him, siphoning funds and setting Daniel up as the scapegoat. An ongoing investigation. Frozen accounts. Seized assets. Every major investor bailed out. Every media outlet had turned on him. His name was smeared across headlines, billionaire Daniel Wade accused of embezzlement. None of it was true. But it didn't matter. Public opinion had made up its mind. He tried calling friends, none answered. He tried staying in hotels, his cards were declined. He couldn't even get into his own apartment. He had nowhere to go. No cash. No warmth. Just a jacket and the phone that would soon die. Daniel had walked for miles, ending up in this small town, far from cameras, reporters, and betrayals. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. So when that woman, he didn't even get her name, let him cut in line, he almost cried. That tiny bit of kindness hit him harder than any lawsuit or news article. For the first time in days, someone had treated him like a person. That night, Clara made soup with water, a potato, and leftover peas. She fed her daughter, tucked her in, and sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Her mind kept going back to the man from the ATM. She wondered where he was sleeping. If he had eaten. If he had anyone. A strange ache filled her chest. The next morning, she walked to the local shelter to ask for extra baby food. On her way, she saw him. Sitting on a bench in the park. Same coat. Same distant eyes. She hesitated, then walked up. "Hi," she said softly. Daniel looked up, surprised. Recognition flashed across his face. "It's you," he said. "You okay?" she asked. He gave a small nod, but it was empty. "You hungry?" she asked again. He didn't answer, but his eyes did. Clara handed him half the sandwich she'd saved from the shelter visit. "It's not much," she said, "but it's warm." He took it like it was gold. "Thank you," he said. "Why are you doing this?" She looked at him and shrugged. "Because I've been there." Daniel stared at her for a long time. No one had ever given him anything without asking for something in return. Not in his world. This woman had nothing, yet she shared it anyway. They talked. She didn't pry, and he didn't confess. They just talked about safe things, the weather, the park, her daughter. His voice began to steady. He smiled for the first time in days. Over the next week, Clara kept running into him. Sometimes she brought him a sandwich. Sometimes they just sat in silence. She found out he had no home, and though she barely had space in her tiny one-bedroom apartment, she offered her couch. He declined at first, but when the temperatures dropped dangerously low, he accepted. Her daughter, Lily, immediately warmed to him. "He's funny," she'd giggle. Daniel found himself smiling again. Laughing, even. Clara didn't treat him like a broken man or a burden. She didn't ask questions. She just let him be. For the first time in years, he felt human. Not a CEO. Not a headline. Just Daniel. As days turned into weeks, he helped around the house. Fixed a leaking faucet. Repaired the old heater. Took Lily to school when Clara's shifts ran long. Slowly, a quiet rhythm formed. He still didn't tell her who he was, he couldn't bear the look that might cross her face. He just wasn't ready. But one evening, she found an old ID card of his in the laundry. "Daniel Wade," she read out loud. "Wait, is this really you?" Silence. He looked up, shame flooding his face. "I didn't mean to lie. I needed a break from that world." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't care about all that. I care about who you are here." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. For the first time, someone saw past the scandal, past the money, past the broken pieces, and chose him anyway. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. The air in Clara's apartment was warm, but inside, his heart was storming. She knew. She'd found out who he was. And yet, she hadn't pushed him away. She hadn't looked at him like the others did, with judgment, fear, or curiosity. No, she looked at him the same way she had the first time she let him cut in line, like he was just a man. That scared him more than anything. Because the truth was, Daniel hadn't felt like just a man in years. He'd felt like a brand, a walking ATM, a target for everyone's expectations. But here, with Clara and her little girl Lily, he was seen. He was enough. The next morning, Clara didn't bring up the ID or ask questions. She just made coffee, packed Lily's lunch, and handed Daniel a cup like always. That simple act nearly broke him. She was giving him a normal day when the world had stripped him of every ounce of normalcy. As Lily put on her shoes, she looked up and said, "Are you gonna walk me to school again today?" Daniel smiled. "You bet." That walk became part of his healing. They passed the same cracked sidewalks, the same corner bakery, the same birds on the telephone wires. But everything looked different when seen through Lily's joy and Clara's quiet strength. He began fixing more things around the building. He helped the elderly neighbor upstairs carry her groceries. He cleaned the alley behind the complex. People in the neighborhood started nodding to him, greeting him with familiarity. No one knew his past. They only saw the present. But even in the comfort of Clara's world, the ghosts of Daniel's life still lingered. One afternoon, while walking past a newsstand, he caught a headline, "Wade Tech Crisis Deepens, Authorities Closing In." His stomach turned. He hadn't checked the news in weeks. Part of him didn't want to know. But another part couldn't stay silent forever. Justice hadn't come. His name was still being dragged through the mud, and his employees were still jobless. People depended on him, and he had disappeared. Coward, the voice in his head whispered. You ran. But Clara's voice, though quiet, was stronger. You're doing your best. That evening, Daniel sat across from Clara as Lily colored on the floor. I need to go back, he said. Clara looked up, still and calm. I need to clear my name. Not just for me, but for all the people I let down. But I'm scared. I don't know if I can face them again. I don't even know where to start. Clara put her spoon down gently. You start with what you know. And you let the truth speak louder than the lies. You didn't come this far to hide. Her words struck something deep in him. No one had ever believed in him without benefit. But Clara did, without question, without reward. Over the next week, Daniel began gathering what he had: old contacts, saved emails, proof of his innocence he had stashed in cloud backups. With Clara's help, they pieced together a timeline of the betrayal. Clara wasn't a tech expert, but she was meticulous. She helped him organize everything, encouraged him when doubt crept in. And Daniel, the man who had once owned towers and yachts, sat in a one-bedroom apartment working late into the night beside a single mother who'd fed him half a sandwich. Eventually, Daniel reached out to a small local journalist known for honest reporting. He didn't go to the big stations, they were already bought. The journalist, intrigued and cautious, agreed to meet. Daniel told everything, on record. He showed files, messages, proof. And most importantly, he did it humbly. No PR team. No lawyers. Just truth. The article went viral in less than a day. Fallen CEO fights back with evidence. Could Daniel Wade be innocent? People paid attention. Other whistleblowers came forward. The investigation reopened. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Daniel was offered interviews, but he declined most. I want the story to be about the truth, he said, not a redemption arc. But things didn't magically fall back into place. It took months. And through all of it, Clara stood by him. She celebrated the small victories, like when the courts unfroze his accounts. She reminded him of who he was, not the man on magazine covers, but the one who fixed her heater and taught Lily to ride a bike. That was the man she believed in. And that was the man Daniel wanted to be. When the dust finally settled, Daniel's name was cleared. His co-founder was arrested. Investors returned, cautiously. His wealth, slowly, followed. But Daniel didn't go back to the penthouse or the designer suits. Instead, he started something new, a foundation to help falsely accused business owners, single mothers, and families in crisis. He named it the Clara Project. Reporters were curious. Who's Clara? They asked. He just smiled and said, the reason I'm still standing. Daniel went back to the neighborhood. He still lived modestly, but now he had options. He bought the building Clara lived in, anonymously, and renovated every apartment. He set up college funds for the neighborhood kids. But most of all, he came back to one place, the park bench, the one where Clara had first brought him a sandwich. He asked her to meet him there. She showed up, nervous, her coat flapping in the wind. He stood, dressed simply, no press, no cameras. Just Daniel. I wanted to say thank you, he said. You saved my life. You're giving me too much credit, she replied, trying to smile. No. I'm not giving you enough, he said, taking her hand. I've been thinking. I've had a lot, and I've lost a lot. But what I found with you and Lily, that's the only thing that ever felt real. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Are you saying? I'm saying I don't want to walk through life without you, he said. You let me cut in line once. And I'd spend every day of the rest of my life trying to earn that kindness. She laughed through her tears. Okay, she whispered. Lily ran up just then, giggling, jumping into Daniel's arms. Are we a family now? She asked innocently. Daniel looked at Clara, then back at Lily. Yeah, he said, voice thick with emotion. We are. And so, the man who had everything, lost it all, and found more than he ever imagined, didn't rebuild an empire. He built a home. A soft rain tapped gently against the windows of Clara's new apartment, the same neighborhood, but everything had changed. The old building had been renovated, clean walls, working heat, even a small rooftop garden now crowned the top floor. The neighborhood buzzed with life, children laughing, lights brighter, sidewalks cleaner. And quietly, behind it all, was Daniel. But not Daniel the CEO, not anymore. He was just Daniel, father, partner, builder, and most importantly, a man at peace. Clara sat at the kitchen table, cradling a warm mug between her hands. She still worked part-time at the shelter downtown, not because she had to anymore, but because she wanted to. Her heart still beat for people like her. Women forgotten, struggling to survive. Now, she could offer them more than comfort, she could offer hope. Daniel came in carrying groceries, smiling as Lily ran into his legs, nearly knocking over the bag. "You were supposed to wait with Mom," he laughed, swinging her up into his arms. "But I missed you," she squealed. Clara looked up, her eyes locking with his. Their silent exchange was full of love and gratitude. So much had happened since that rainy morning at the ATM. And yet, it still felt surreal. Later that evening, while Lily slept, Daniel and Clara sat on the couch. A flickering candle cast soft shadows on the wall. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. "I wanted you to see this," he said quietly. The headline read, "Wade Foundation launches free housing initiative, first project dedicated to the woman who gave me hope." Underneath was a photo of Daniel standing outside a new women's shelter bearing the name, Clara's Haven. Clara stared at it in disbelief. "I told them not to use your photo." "I know you hate the spotlight," he said, smiling sheepishly. "But I couldn't hide your name. You changed my life. And you're changing theirs, too." Clara blinked away tears. "I didn't do anything special." "You were kind when no one else was," he said softly. "That's special." A silence passed between them. Warm. Full. "I've been thinking," Daniel began, a little nervous. "About the future. About us." Clara leaned in, listening. "I don't want us to just live together and float through this. I want to build something permanent. Solid. A real home, a real family." He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a delicate ring. Not flashy. Not massive. But elegant. Thoughtful. "Clara, will you marry me?" Clara gasped, covering her mouth. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She nodded, smiling through the tears. "Yes. Yes." They embraced tightly, their hearts beating in sync. It wasn't about the money, the headlines, or the redemption. It was about love, hard-earned, slowly built, rooted in trust and realness. The wedding was small. In the neighborhood park where Daniel had once sat cold and hungry, now chairs lined the grass, flowers adorned benches, and children danced in bare feet. The community showed up, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Clara wore a simple dress. Daniel wore a smile wider than anyone had ever seen. And Lily was the flower girl, giggling all the way down the aisle. As they exchanged vows, Daniel said, "You gave me more than shelter, Clara. You gave me a reason to live. To try. To believe. I promise to never forget where we started." Clara replied, "You reminded me that love doesn't come in shiny packages. It comes in broken pieces, mended together with kindness. I'm proud of the men you are, not for what you have, but for what you give." The crowd wept and clapped. It was the kind of wedding that stayed in hearts, not just in photos. Months passed, then a year. Life unfolded in unexpected ways. Daniel's foundation grew. Clara became a speaker at women's conferences, telling her story not as a fairy tale, but as a message of strength. Lily grew into a bright, beautiful girl who loved her parents fiercely. But life, as it does, brought new challenges. One day, Daniel was invited to speak at a global tech summit. He hesitated. "I left that world," he told Clara. She smiled gently. "But maybe now you can change it." He agreed. At the summit, Daniel took the stage. Lights flashed, the room silent. He didn't talk about stocks, innovations, or his company. He talked about kindness. About being broken. About how a woman at an ATM had changed his life. How the richest people are the ones who give when they have nothing. And how true leadership means seeing people not as assets, but as souls. The room erupted in applause. As he stepped off stage, a young woman in a torn coat approached him, crying, "I watched your video online. I was going to give up tonight. But now I think I can keep going." Daniel didn't offer her money. He gave her his number and said, "Call us. We'll help." Because that's who he had become. Not just a man who got his life back, but a man who gave life back to others. A soft rain tapped gently against the windows of Clara's new apartment, the same neighborhood, but everything had changed. The old building had been renovated, clean walls, working heat, even a small rooftop garden now crowned the top floor. The neighborhood buzzed with life, children laughing, lights brighter, sidewalks cleaner. And quietly, behind it all, was Daniel. But not Daniel the CEO, not anymore. He was just Daniel, father, partner, builder, and most importantly, a man at peace. Clara sat at the kitchen table, cradling a warm mug between her hands. She still worked part-time at the shelter downtown, not because she had to anymore, but because she wanted to. Her heart still beat for people like her, women forgotten, struggling to survive. Now, she could offer them more than comfort, she could offer hope. Daniel came in carrying groceries, smiling as Lily ran into his legs, nearly knocking over the bag. "You were supposed to wait with Mom," he laughed, swinging her up into his arms. "But I missed you," she squealed. Clara looked up, her eyes locking with his. Their silent exchange was full of love and gratitude. So much had happened since that rainy morning at the ATM. And yet, it still felt surreal. Later that evening, while Lily slept, Daniel and Clara sat on the couch. A flickering candle cast soft shadows on the wall. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper. "I wanted you to see this," he said quietly. The headline read, "Wade Foundation launches free housing initiative. First project dedicated to the woman who gave me hope." Underneath was a photo of Daniel standing outside a new women's shelter bearing the name, Clara's Haven. Clara stared at it in disbelief. "I told them not to use your photo." "I know you hate the spotlight," he said, smiling sheepishly. "But I couldn't hide your name. You changed my life. And you're changing theirs, too." Clara, a soft